Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Takedown. I'm Nick, the host, here on the Takedown. Oh, okay, for some reason I'm hearing the audio in my ear. Here on the Takedown, remember what our motto is: subverting power with radical thought. And so today, I'm really going to spend the first few minutes kind of recapping some important things. For those of you who do not know, I have some. I had an interview with John Baraka last week, and we talked about some important things. But something that stuck out to me that really I think was really heavy was that if you're going to commit yourself to radical change or revolutionary ideas, or revolutionary thought, revolutionary practice, or creating some sort of political revolution or otherwise, you have to first begin to study and educate yourself about the history and the context of the situation you find yourself in, as well as the theory and philosophy behind radical ideas, radical change, imagining a new form beyond what currently exists. These things are things that we on the left have to take very, very seriously. And I don't mean it in an esoteric kind of way. This is not like where you can get together and you want to talk about, well, Marx said the falling rate of profit X, Y, and Z, and so said, yada, yada, yada. This is not like an esoteric thing. This is really for practical applications. And I think, he said it best when he said, without revolutionary theory, there is no revolution. So when you're trying to bring about something that's revolutionary, something that's different from what you currently exist in, you have to study this stuff. And I'm not saying you have to write a dissertation, I'm not saying you have to have a PhD in it, yada, but just understanding basic concepts, the basic philosophy behind change, how it works, behind things like whatever your issue or things that you're trying to promote, whatever you're behind, you have to really try to understand the basics of it so you can't be fooled. And I think in America, particularly in America, we're kind of force-fed a sort of individualism, and that's kind of standing in the way of really envisioning how we can achieve something, because we all think, oh, we can't do this, we can't do that, and once you got on that plane where you're not thinking about how to get to where you're going, you're only concerned about, well, I don't know exactly how it is that I get there right now. I don't have like a detailed roadmap that I feel is going to work. You're kind of stuck in like a paralysis. So the first thing I would recommend everybody do, well, actually the second thing, first thing I want to tell everybody to do is make sure you follow the Takedown. We have a Facebook page. I post the videos there for people to see there, and I will be trying to have more discussions as the group gets larger. I would like you to take the chance to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We want to start building a following there, and basically growing the reach and bringing this conversation to more people. So be sure to subscribe to those things. Tell your friends about our videos, especially people that are just coming into being radicalized. Like, I think what we do here, is not as esoteric, it's not as detailed as a lot of the other shows where people get lost. It's really about laying the groundwork for being able to be open to those things and kind of guiding us through, kind of like a radicalization, but it's like slow. I'm not going to just go from 0 to 60 really, really fast here. So I want to encourage you guys to share these videos, to share these thoughts, to kind of, promote the channel and grow the community that we speak from. Now, I just talked about, we just had an interview with John Baraka last week. I would encourage you guys to go back and take a listen to that conversation. It was a very enlightening conversation. Like we basically covered, a broad swath. We didn't go far into detail on any particular subject. But we basically did a broad brush, like, hey, this is where we are. And, these are some of the problems that we see. And then, we kind of start to, get off into detail on a few things here and there. But I think we covered a lot of ground in that hour and 18 or hour and 10 minutes that we spoke. And so I would encourage everybody to go and take a look at that. I know, it just happened, so it should be up in the channel. Also, don't forget to follow me on Twitter. I forgot to mention that I also have a Twitter account at the Takedown Nick. I post commentary there. I post links from people that I follow there. Just basically just keep in touch. Let's grow the community. Let's expand our reach, and then retweet my stuff. Send it out to your people so we can see what, so we can actually basically expand the conversation and get those ideas out there. Because a lot of times they just don't have the reach. And I know my audience is small, but maybe whoever can reach somebody else, and so on and so on, and like a little network, and we can kind of expand it that way. So do help out people. Now, before we talk to John Baraka, and even when we talked to him, I spoke about the federal jobs guarantee versus the UBI, and I'm gonna start with that again today. So everybody keeps on talking about how, every time I talk to people about this, they're like, well, automation is coming, and it's going to be inevitable that X, Y, and Z is going to happen. We're just going to have the UBI at some point. It's like, well, where does this come from? What a federal job guarantee, meaning everybody's guaranteed a job as a human right at a living wage, commensurate of your experience and all of that. That means that there is no need for a UBI. Everybody who's able to work is able to work, is given a job as a human right. That fundamentally transforms the relationship between labor and the private sector in general. So this idea that because something is inevitable, which is not even inevitable, I'm going to talk about that in a second, but because technological advancement and stuff like that, the UBI is the only viable thing and it has to happen is kind of nonsense. Like every time something is favorable to the power structure, there's always going to be this prevailing ideology that it is inevitable, it is unchanging, you can't do anything about it. And that just flies in the face of history. That flies in the face of historical context of the condition we find ourselves in today, right? So if it were up to those people saying that, this is as far as we can go, this is as good as it's going to go, where we exist is like an inevitable, progression. We've arrived at some inevitable place, and we're not going further anywhere else. Like history is just going to stop. And I'm going to say, first off, history doesn't stop until we're all dead. The human race would have to cease to exist for us to say that this is as far as we've come and this is as good as it's going to get. There is always room for improvement, and there's always the potential for mankind, humankind, for modern civilization, for all of us to do better every day, no matter what year it is. We can be, living in Star Trek, where everybody's made equal and all these weird things and all that. But again, the Federation makes mistakes, and there's always room for improvement. Like that may seem like an ideal utopia to us, but they traded one set of problems for another, and that's what life is about. That's the nature of things. You trade one problem for another, but that doesn't mean that you should stay where you are for fear of future problems. That means you progress forward, because that's what living is. You move forward. So I just want to kind of say that, right now we have a lot of TED Talks. We have, neoliberals and, people that consider themselves liberal or whatever. They're out there kind of pushing the UBI as some sort of solution. And I would say that to be wary of that. Whenever there's, a lot of mass culture, like kind of latching on to something, and trying to state it as fact without really proving it out. And that's what they're doing. They're just stating it as fact. They're just saying, oh, it's inevitable that this will happen. Oh, if you do X, Y, and Z, this is going to happen no matter what. There's no process by which things can be changed. There's no, shifting sand in there where a different outcome can be possible. In fact, they just say like it's already a foregone conclusion. And I think that when you see the power structure doing that, when you see that on mainstream media, and we know when I say mainstream media, I'm talking about NBC, CBS, pop culture, like that stuff is controlled by interests. And these interests have an interest in propagating beliefs and ideology. So when we see these things there, we already know where that's coming from. We know that that's probably not for us. And I'm gonna say that this should be the warning sign that perhaps the power structure, or perhaps the powerful interests, or the people at the top, or the pseudo liberals, or the neoliberals, perhaps they know something about the UBI that you don't know. Just like they knew something about capitalism when people were trying to overthrow feudalism. They knew something about capitalism that you don't know. They said, equality, fraternity, and brotherhood, but somehow it just never really made it there. And things kind of stayed, resembling the way it was before. And so again, when I talk about study, historical context, we need to be able to discern the difference between a facelift and then structural change. So I think that pretty much sums it up when I was talking about the UBI. Just be wary of that, and I would encourage all of you to go and check out. There's an economist. Her name is Pavlina. She's making some very, very important arguments that I think should be listened to. And I hadn't heard her before I made my defense of a federal jobs guarantee over a UBI and implementation. But I believe if you heard my short interview with Sandy Darity, we were kind of speaking on the same wavelength there, talking about why it would be better to have an enhanced public sector producing public goods and public works, as opposed to merely handing out income to individuals. And I spoke about it with him. Then, of course, I had the debate with Salam. We spoke about it again. And then, of course, I brought it up again with Ajamu. And he basically flat out said, the idea of a universal job or a universal job guarantee, and not just like some kind of subsistence wage, but a living wage where you can thrive, complete with giving you jobs training. If let's say you're tech number one, after so many years, you become 2 and 3, you can become the supervisor, and so on and so on. Like having an actual career progression through the public sector as a form of a federal jobs guarantee, why that's the more progressive and more transformational option as opposed to the UBI. And I think, it could just be that we share a similar ideology. Could be that we've read similar things, but I think we're on to something. And the left as a whole, is notorious for not being able to catch on to things very quickly. Like we're like, oh yeah, let's get behind this. And then, next thing you know, oh, this is the same thing as it was before. But there was some dissonance over here that said that that's what it would be. And we just didn't listen to them because we just wanted to believe, or we just wanted to take what was right in front of us. And we have to go beyond that. In fact, I would say for us to really win stuff, we have to actually set the agenda, set the goals, set those things, and push it on them. We can't wait for them to offer us something in line with what we would like. That's actually counterintuitive to how politics works. And that's counterintuitive to what our goals and objectives are and who we're actually working against. We can't actually, basically set our goals up based on what's offered by our political opposition to us. So instead of saying, hey, we're going to choose between Trump's, Healthcare Act, AHCA, excuse me, I forget his acronym, American Healthcare Act, AHCA, yeah, I said it right. Or we're going to choose between Barack Obama's ACA, we need to set the agenda and say, no. We don't accept either of those choices. We're pushing for either a nationalization of the healthcare system, meaning everything just becomes the VA, except now it's under public control and we can make it better, or we can do a single payer-like system. We set the agenda, not trying to pick between what they offer us. And I think that seems to be a problem. And I had an interview with Les Leopold about this. That's where the radicalism comes from. That's where the militancy comes from, where you know what your power is and you set the agenda rather than letting them give you something or derail you with something that you think is good. And then it ends up being total bullshit. So that's all I'm going to say about that one. I'm going to move on to technology and science. And I've been meaning to speak about this since the scientists had their march. I don't know if that was a month ago or 2 months ago. Scientists had a march saying, Donald Trump was against science and all of this. And, he's not funding research and he's setting civilization back and, he's putting us all in peril. Look, the last thing we need to do is make it seem like the sky is falling. Whether or not Donald Trump increases or decreases funding, for science in general does not necessarily mean the sky is falling. However, that doesn't mean that it doesn't set us back in some form. It does. But you know what else sets us back? Copyrights, monopolistic control of markets by companies. That sets technological advancement back by decades. But nobody's saying we need to get rid of those things. Nobody's saying that the end of civilization is being put in peril by those things. Technology is a mixed bag. It doesn't always offer benefits to all of mankind. And then the benefits that it does offer, it doesn't offer them to all men or all people equally. Technology is a tool, much like a hammer. I can use it to bash somebody's head in, or I can use it to build a house. It's just all in who's using it and for what purpose. The same technology that gave us the transistor and gave us modern computing and digital electronics, analog electronics, right? And then the smaller transistor gave us digital electronics. That same technology gave us nuclear weapons, guidance missiles. This is something we have to really grapple with. All technology is not necessarily good for humanity, just like all technology is not necessarily bad for humanity. So what we want to get out of is just saying, well, technology is good in general, or robots are good in general, automation is good in general, or these things are inevitable. We don't get to direct that. Actually, you can direct that. Much of technological innovation is directed mostly by the state, because the state basically provides a lot of money for funding for research. And then once that basic research reaches a point where they actually get something, it's given off or sold off, at a cheap price to the private industry, where private industry basically carries out the rest of basically carries it the last leg of the way to actually make it profitable. And once they make it profitable, that's when they get to make all the profits. But of course, the technological advancement that was caused by like people investing in it, like the public sector investing in the basic research to get it to the point where it could be something, that's all borne by the public. So those are privatized risks. But public risk, privatized profit. Like the public doesn't necessarily get the full benefit of that. So if you're trying to get to a point where, like I was saying, where technology can be shared, or technological advancement can actually be to the benefit of people, we would have to start maybe adjusting how we direct technological advancement in general, and maybe get away from a system of public funding. And then once it becomes profitable, give it off to the private sector for basically pennies on the dollar. Perhaps that should be something we should look at. Perhaps having the private sector have a lot of control over technology and how it's directed is not necessarily a good thing. Now, that's not saying that you have to go all one way or the other, but perhaps we should start, addressing specifically the areas where we can really do a lot of good, like medicine or something like that. There's an enormous amount of waste in medicine, and it's because it's controlled by private hands. And you can say what you want about innovation, but literally, there was a study I think I saw where it said for every drug that came out, it costs like $15 billion. We could just set a $15 billion prize for any drug that's developed, and we could just hand it directly to the businesses rather than doing like a public-private model and, having to transfer funding through this and that and then go through all these different loops. It's just more efficient to just have like a prize pot. But I'm actually going to go into more detail because I'm just kind of winging it off my mind right now because I'm speaking. But I just wanted to point out that it's seriously flawed logic to say that because Trump is not funding, technological innovation, he's setting civilization back. No, he's really not. And now a lot of the scientists out there were saying he's ignoring the science of climate change. Okay, now that's a more valid point. But what I would say is all U.S. presidents since Reagan have ignored the science behind climate change. So he's definitely not out of the ordinary. Did we forget Bush and Barack Obama? You had Bush who denied it just like Trump did, but then you had Barack Obama who acknowledged it, but still put forth no real aggressive policy that's going to actually address the kind of thing, the kind of situation we find ourselves in. The problem is huge. It's an existential threat. But, we keep getting words like, yeah, we understand it's a big problem, but we're going to take some meaningful steps. Meaningful step? What does that mean? You guys, they've been saying that for 38 years. And these meaningful steps never really manifest itself into a mass-based policy that we actually need to be doing. And I hate when people start arguing. And they'll make these arguments like, hey, just because we're not getting all the problems solved or X, Y, and Z doesn't mean we can't take meaningful steps. Look, the meaningful steps, a slow transition, that was what that needed to take place 40 years ago. Ronald Reagan had an energy transition. Not Ronald Reagan. Jimmy Carter had an energy transition plan in place and ready to go to get us on a course to be nearly renewable by now. Nearly all the way renewable. And that was back then. They had a plan to start moving that forward. But what happened? Ronald Reagan comes in, destroys it. Bill Clinton comes in. George Bush Sr. comes in, doesn't do anything about it. He didn't renew that. Bill Clinton comes in, doesn't do that. What does he do? He deregulates the banks. Like this is the kind of politics we find ourselves in. That's the shifting of the Overton window to the right. Like they can't even go back. And just so we're clear, Jimmy Carter was a conservative force in the Democratic Party at the time. So was Truman. These are conservative forces in the party. But it's just continuously going worse and worse and worse. Like if we can't even get a politician to match Jimmy Carter, who was very conservative in the Democratic Party for the 70s when he was around, we've kind of fallen a long way to the right, and that's really, really bad. But back to my point, I hate when they say we need to take meaningful steps, but it never really turns into policy. Meaningful steps is something we should have done 40 years ago. Right now, we're behind the 8 ball. We need a massive wartime transition to make some sort of transformation to be almost nearly off of fossil fuels in 20 to 30 years. And part of the problem that I find that we're in is even if we did that, we're right up against the border for like a small size catastrophe. If that even makes any sense. I mean, the word catastrophe, we're already on our course for a straight up, large catastrophe. But even if we stopped all fossil fuel emissions, almost globally for the next 30 years, over the next 30 years or 20 years or so, we're still close to the edge. We would be like right below small scale catastrophe. So that's just, it just boggles my mind. Like right now, instead of really talking about how they need a wartime mobilization, I think Bernie Sanders did mention it, and this is to his credit. I'm not sure, if he really was ready to double down and really use political capital to do it, but at least he was mentioning it. And so he does deserve some credit there. I mean, it's unclear whether or not he would really follow through with those policies, but he did damn better than everybody else in that regard, which isn't saying much because they did nothing. So I think we need to stop acting like we have time, like this is something that's going to wait. No, the actions that were done in the 90s, that's what we're living through. Those are those consequences of those actions. That's what we're living through today. And what we do today, that's what we're living through 20 years from now, because this is like a slow feedback kind of deal. Like carbon gets released, some of it gets absorbed, then it gets released back again, and it doubles down and things of that nature. It's like a system, just because you don't feel the direct effect today doesn't mean we haven't dialed in a lot of damage to be done in the next 20 years. And that stuff is being decided by what we do today. And so that's how the system is working. But people have this weird tendency not to be able to understand that what you do today may have effects 20 years from now. It's just like outside of our scale. It's like off the human scale. So we can't recognize what the situation is. And then on top of that, realize, well, I'm living through consequences from 20 years ago. So I need to change today so that 20 years from now, the next generation doesn't live through my bad choices. And I think everybody's kind of stuck in like this instant gratification thing. So if you tell them, hey, even if you made all these drastic changes today, we're not going to feel it today. We're going to feel it 20 years from now. It's sort of like they just don't care, and then on top of that, you have to tell them, hey, we're going to suffer for the next 20 years from the decision we made 10 years ago or yesterday or something like that. That's a hard sell. But I think we have to start learning that in politics, you have to start trying to make the majorities, to make the consensus, not just wait for one to magically appear before you, because I guarantee whatever one that appears before you, again, is not the one you need, not the one you want, especially if you're talking about a radical transformation standpoint. It's not what you want. If you want it, you have to build it. No one's going to give it to you, and it's not going to magically appear. This is not magic. And so the last thing I want to say about the scientists and their marching, and it's something very sad that I have to say this, because I feel like this is bad, that what I'm going to say is going to sound cold, but if you're really complaining or if you're really sad that, Donald Trump is able to cut funding for scientific research and things of that nature, and it's really bad for us, perhaps instead of, let me explain my background here. I know some people that work in NASA. I know some people that do research for the federal government. And when they spoke to me, each of them was trying to say that, hey, they want basically a system where science and research are kind of free from federal funding. And I mean, the politics of federal funding for a program. And I was saying that's not a good idea. You don't need to add more things to the public budget that's not open to politics. That's not really subject to democratic control. Because who's to say you do that? Who's to say what research you do and things of that nature? Who's to say that's beneficial to us? What if that's not in the public interest? What if the people don't want that type of research? What if, they just spend it all on more weapons and, more ways to kill people rather than medicines and things of that nature that we need to make our lives better? Like, it's because of situations like that you want to have things in democratic control so you can actually have some direction on how the money is spent, on how those benefits are really amassed and distributed amongst people. So rather than arguing that you should be removed from public oversight, is basically what they're saying. They're saying they don't want to be subject to political whims, so they want to have a budget that's allotted to them that's not political and removed from public oversight, which is a bad thing. What they should have done is be saying, hey, we need to partner with the Department of Education and have education programs so we can get off in the schools and explain to people, make the case to people. We need to use some of that budget that we do have to take out ad buys instead of hiring contractors, take out ad buys and show the American people how what we do here in this lab is beneficial to them. Show them how the research that they pay for benefits them. Show the value that you're bringing to everybody's life for the money that they spend on you. When you do that, that's called politics. And guess what? It will be harder for a Republican administration to come in or a conservative administration to come in and start defunding you if everybody's seeing the benefits that you are generating. Everybody's seeing the value that you're returning to the public. That really is what it comes down to. So if you really want to maintain your funding, you need to get out there and play politics. Start doing some mass political education. The left in general, outside of the scientists, outside of scientific research, we all need to be doing mass political education. Because guess what? If we're not doing it, you better believe that the opposing side is doing it. They have foundations, they have think tanks, they have a ton of money, and they're focusing it on miseducation, teaching people the wrong thing, directing the curricula in schools. All of this stuff is what they're doing to make sure they teach people the wrong thing so their policy can go forward. We have to put some sort of effort in to teach people the right things, teach people about civics, teach people about politics, teach people how to create change and how it's done, at a mass level. And that can start in the schools. And to the scientists and the people that do scientific research, they need to make a better commitment to show the public sector, to show the public in general, how research is important to them and how what it does brings about benefits. And I think people like Neil deGrasse Tyson that are out there kind of trying to educate and trying to bring awareness to that issue, that's a step in the right direction, but he's just one person. And, a lot of times he's doing a lot of comedy and then he engages in like making fun of people and stuff like that. No, we need more straight lace. Like, hey, if it weren't for this research that the government paid for, you wouldn't have this drug, and this drug has saved this many lives. So that's just what I want to say about that. So bottom line is that the solution is not to have something that's not tied to public oversight. The solution is for these agencies, these groups, these advocacy groups to really get out there and start doing some political education, making coalitions with people and making a broad-based coalition so that you can actually have the political capital and the strength to really push forward a policy agenda that protects your interests. Now I'm going to take a second to read some of the comments here. Remember, guys, this is going to be a short show because we got a holiday coming up and I have things I need to do. So I'm not going to be doing a full show, but it actually looks like we might not even make it being able to be a short show. We might make the full hour. Let's see. Can I close it out a little bit earlier? There's a comment here that says nothing good will happen until we get money out of politics. Right now, both parties are controlled by the fossil fuel industries. I mean, look, I don't deny that money has a huge influence in politics, but money can be beaten, especially if people are determined to do so. And what I mean by that is if you put your foot down and really get out there and start doing some grassroots organizing, you can start making majorities. Like the idea that money now is more powerful in the United States than it ever was before is wrong. Money has always dictated United States policies, but that hasn't stopped us from winning stuff. And so this idea that, it's too powerful and unless we get the money out, we can't win. No, we can win. We just have to have the concerted effort and the will to put some real effort on something. And it may take 10 or 20 years to get that victory, but we have to be concerted and we have to really push and make it happen. That's how the labor struggle was able to move forward. That's how the civil rights struggle was able to move forward, because they were willing to get out there and struggle for a decade or two. And I just think that the left really needs to understand that that may be what it's going to take. And it may be that we may have to risk some things in order to win this. So I keep repeating that all the time. And I have some yeah. Yeah, okay. The firing of the black college professor, I'm actually going to have to look in more detail at that. I'm probably going to do an episode on race and start to really try to get down off in there. So far, I've pretty much kind of not really gone into it because it's a complex issue. And okay, there was for all of us who are not aware, there was a college professor that appeared on Fox News, Tucker Carlson's show, to, I guess, defend black people, as many people do, and for some reason, political power was brought to bear against the university where he works, and he was promptly put on leave, placed on administrative leave, and this is just to show you what kind of power the right and organized money really has, and the risk that people take when they go out and try to tell the truth. So I'm going to probably comment on that after I get more detail about exactly what was going on. I haven't actually watched the video, but I was just going to point that out. I saw that somebody brought that up into a comment, so I'll just go ahead and leave that as it is. The last thing I want to talk about before we go ahead and log off here is the sarin gas attack, supposedly, that occurred in Syria. If you give me 1 second. So supposedly, Assad used a sarin gas attack in a region here. And, Seymour Hersh has been doing some excellent reporting on the issue. And I think that at this point, even in the beginning, like there was a lot of criticism. There was a professor from MIT, and I forgot what his name was. Yeah, Theodore Postal. Theodore Postal basically raised a lot of doubts about the attack being sarin gas because, they were showing like this smoke and all that. And they were like, well, sarin gas is odorless, it's colorless. It doesn't emit smoke. It doesn't make smoke clouds. So that doesn't necessarily mean it was sarin, So now the truth comes out. Seymour Hersh, he's got an anonymous source. I guess he cobbled together reports from both the Russian and CIA intelligence, and saying that the Russians provided the Assad government with a laser-guided missile, a conventional laser-guided missile. There was no sarin gas involved, and that they hit the strike in that region. This is the region of the Syrian town of Khan Sheikhoun, and that basically, some experts were getting together and saying that this was a conventional, not a chemical attack. And, Seymour Hersh was one of the first people on the scene to say, well, Theodore Postal, the MIT professor, was one of the first people on the scene to say, no, this looks like a conventional attack. And then, of course, Seymour went in and did some more research and got some anonymous sources from, some of his contacts in government and foreign policy in general. And I'm just going to read some of this clip. It says, gas attack in Syria may not have been Syrian gas, nor was it a deliberate gas attack perpetrated by the Syrian government. In Hersh's account, Trump was persuaded by social media images of victims who seemed to show signs of a chemical attack. Members of his national security team were not convinced the images were proof of a chemical attack. And so basically what you have here, you have a situation where Donald Trump, may have been flim-flammed with some photos of people saying this was a chemical attack, or how the American people were flim-flammed when you had all these videos being made in Syria about the city that was about to be retaken by the Syrian government. Everybody was about to be slaughtered and massacred, and that turned out to be wholly farce. So, like, again, we're in a situation where bullshit moves a lot faster than the truth. Especially when you have a lot of money behind it, or when it's useful for the power structure to push one narrative over the truth. And so, you can say what you want about Trump being flim-flam. Not a lot of people expect him to know a lot, right? But I'm going to actually hold him to account for this, because if you know the situation that you're in, if you know about how the world is, if you know anything about U.S. history, foreign policy, you should be immensely suspicious of anybody that's in the circle pushing for armed conflict. And so, this is a standard I'm not just applying to Trump. This is a standard I've applied to supposedly progressive presidents as well. Like, if you're sitting in that chair, there's always going to be somebody trying to deceive you into doing something that may not be what you want to do. And so when you have your advisors giving you advice, particularly on foreign relations, particularly on foreign policy, particularly when it comes to, bullets and bombs and death and destruction, you need to be wary. So if he wasn't ready to sit in that chair and to be skeptical of his intelligence, even though they have a history of lying to both the American people and to presidents, a history of lying to both the American people and to presidents, then, he just shouldn't be in that chair. If you can't come into that chair with that in the back of your mind when your advisors are speaking to you, then you're not ready to sit in that chair. And that's not to say Hillary Clinton would have done any better. And yes, I have to say that. That is not to say Hillary Clinton would have done any better, because she was already saluting the missile strike that he basically got flim-flammed into doing. She said that she would salute that, she supported that, and she wanted more. So to say that, she would do much better than him, I think she would manage the PR better than him, because she's definitely a professional at that, but I don't think she would make different decisions per se. And I think evidence of that is when she came out and said she supported the missile strike and she wanted to get tough on Russia and do more, calling for more action. So even if Trump at best is, been flim-flammed, at worst, he just doesn't care and just does whatever willy-nilly, or at worst, he's just lying about, what happened over there to suit some agenda. I think it's reasonable to say that based on her support of those actions, she wouldn't have done any better. And I think that's a fair argument. So I just want to kind of put that out there. I'm going to probably put a link to Seymour Hersh's article, or it's really not necessarily an article, it's an interview. And then he has an earlier article where he actually goes through and kind of writes about how the attack being sarin doesn't cut the mustard as far as like holding up under intense investigation. So now, again, I'm going to take some time to remind you guys that we do have a YouTube channel that's separate from the Benjamin Dixon Show. It's called The Takedown. Please take some time to subscribe, tell your friends about it, spread what we're talking about here. I really want to start growing our community here, and leave comments. I know not everybody who watches the videos leave comments, but if you go back through my older videos and you look at them, like when people make comments, I do take the time to respond, especially because my audience is small. Take advantage of that while we still have it, guys, because I know once we get to like 1,000 people or something like that, and when I get 150 or so comments, I'm not going to be able to respond to each and every last one of them. But so right now, I'm still able to respond to most, if not all, especially ones that ask a question or want clarification on something. So to go ahead, like I said, subscribe, check out our YouTube channel, follow me on Twitter, The Takedown Nick. It's right there at The Takedown Nick. I'm the host of The Takedown, Subverting Power, Radical Thought. I'm just going to start making sure that we take the time every day to remind our viewers that come in and view our channel to go ahead and do that. Subscribe, share our stuff. On Facebook, we have a Facebook group. Like our Facebook group. And I think that's about it on that. And I want to say again, last week we had an amazing interview with Jamal Baraka. And also, the Time before that, I had a debate on the UBI versus the federal jobs guarantee. I think that those are conversations. I think those are conversations we really need to get out there, and I want everybody to view those. Those are really important. So I think that you guys should go back and review those. The last thing I want to say about that is, you're right. Somebody in the comments said Rania Khalek said that the Syria strikers were based off of false info, but most liberal organizations dismissed her. Yes, that is true. I myself, was the target of a lot of hostility when I proposed the counter narrative to the mainstream narrative that the Syrian government was this great bad actor and all of that. I got a lot of pushback from that myself, and people were telling me, oh, I'm from Syria and things of that nature and X, Y, and Z. But here we are, couple years in, and I feel completely vindicated. Like, ever since this conflict has began, a lot of the stuff that has really unfolded has kind of shown to me that, again, all of that stuff was bullshit. We live in a situation where everything's turned upside down. And I'm not saying the Syrian government doesn't have flaws. I'm not saying that it's perfect. I'm not saying it's a total democracy. It's a right-wing reactionary government, and it's quite repressive. When you compare it to first world nations, not in the Middle East, but when you put it in the Middle East, in that region, it's not nowhere near as repressive as like Bahrain or Saudi Arabia. And these are comments that people like Ben Norton have made before. So this is not necessarily a new analysis or anything like that. This is just really just being critical. Like, the government is there and it exists, if you know the history of Syria, mostly because it was born out of state-sponsored repression of the left. Most of that done by the United States I want to say from the 40s all the way up to like the 60s. It was like a time of upheaval in that country, where the left had a government that was elected there, and it was kind of destroyed. U.S. intervention. That's how it works out. When you suppress the left, the right grows more powerful, and we're seeing that here in the United States. So that's all I want to say, guys. Today, I'll answer one more question from the comments here. It says, "Would you support regional third parties and try to create coalitions which take seats from Dems and Republicans?" Yes, I would. In fact, that is my ideal scenario. Like, rather than supporting one party only, that's like a national presence, or like, trying to have that one party gather up all the troops and all that. No. What I feel we do need is coalitions. And there's a book that I got from the Left Forum called Refinery Town by Steve Early. I've worked about halfway through it. I want everybody to take a look at this book. This book is very, very important because in Richmond, California, they did just that. I'm going to have them on the show. We're going to talk about it after I finish reading it. But yes, coalition is going to be the way we have to go. And we need to, basically create something that starts taking seats from both the parties to really get that agenda pushed forward. So I'm 100% in agreement with that. I'm about out of time now, so I'm going to go ahead and leave us with a quote. And this one, again, is going to be from Gramsci. He says, "Man is above all else mind and consciousness. That is, he is a product of history, not nature." And I think what that means is whenever somebody says it's human nature to do X, Y, and Z, it's human nature to do this, and that, that's not true. We are basically products of history, products of our environment. It's a feedback. And if we understand that that's what it is, statements like that have no merit. They're completely baseless. So just think about that, guys. We are a product of history, not of nature. Have a good night.